We're in the oh, sort myself out here a bit. There we go. Right, we're in the Small Woods again. It's beginning of May, and we've lost all the snows, of course, now. It's actually quite a warm series of days we've had last kind of 4 or 5 days, which has been nice. Quite dry still, hasn't rained much really. So just having one of those kind of normal early spring kind of areas where it gets very dry and not particularly warm, but warmish. I'm sure that will change. I'm in the woods, barefoot for this, well, kind of the first time this year. It's been too cold really to be barefoot. I know some people go barefoot all year long, but myself, I think if you went barefoot without any foot covering all year long, you'd get either frostbite in your toes and all manner of strangers. So wear moccasins, or actually, if the weather is really grim, just standard Wellington boots. But anyway, now the season is for barefoot. Just showing you. There we go. Apologised for the dirty feet. It's a bit muddy, a bit further back, but to tell the truth, mud is a beautiful feeling, sensation on the feet. It's much nicer walking through mud than it is walking along a road. And I have a theory, and it's only a theory, along with everything else that gets thrown around for the pros and cons of wearing shoes and barefooting, particularly barefoot running, is that really to go barefoot, there's no such thing as an intermediate stage. A lot of these companies sell kind of a shoe that, you know, is a kind of intermediate shoe between being completely barefoot and wearing a shoe. And to our shoe addicted brains, it's very difficult for us, our brains, I think, to differentiate between a shoe that's a very thin-soled shoe and a shoe that's a thick-soled shoe. And I think our brains just say, you've got a shoe on your foot, and therefore you tend to walk or run as if you've got a shoe, and in which case there is all the dangers of all the injuries you might get from carrying on to walk or run, just as you always have done, as if you're wearing a big thick-soled shoe. So you find, particularly along lots of people saying, oh, I went barefoot and began running barefoot. Hang on, we'll take through a bramble patch here. There we go. And I had all these chronic injuries like metatarsals and Achilles and stuff like that. And it's primarily because, first of all, they kind of threw themselves in with great gusto into barefooting. It takes about 6 months, I think, for most people's feet and legs and body to adjust to barefooting again. And secondly, is that because they've run with some form of thin-soled shoe on, they've run very similar to the way that they've always run. And so it's a kind of a double whammy of opportunities for further injuries. So, but I do advocate going straight into barefoot. I don't advocate at all putting on another shoe, a thin-sole shoe. I mean, for instance, as you look here, I've got the Vibram 5-finger, which is a very popular and rather expensive rimless shoe, a very thin-soled, although these ones, they've lost their way a bit, I think, the company. These ones are a bit thicker soled than you would expect from them, but hey-ho. And I think in order for you to understand what barefooting is about, you have to go into barefoot and just run without any shoes. You have to understand what the ground feels like. You have to adopt a much more, I would say, leisured style of walking or running. You've got to understand what the ground feels like beneath your feet, what hurts and what doesn't hurt, in particular ways of running and walking. After you've done that, then you can progress. You can treat yourself to a pair of thin-soled shoes, just to give yourself a bit more protection, particularly if you are running on a lot on road or surfaces which are man-made, which tend to be, it's the man-made surfaces that are actually the worst for your feet. Walking through woods, and particularly walking across moorland. I have to say moorland is a beautiful thing to walk across. It's like what people say, it's like walking across a carpet, and it is. It's like walking across the most luxurious carpet or running. But surfaces like roads, tracks are tricky, because of course the broken nature of them. Tracks tend to be quite painful to walk across and run across particularly, so you might want to slip on a pair of, well, we have actually got a pair, we make native buckskin shoes, very, very thin, from deer hide that we process ourselves into buckskin, and we sell them to barefoot runners particularly, and walkers, because it gives you that very intimate sense of walking on the ground, but gives your feet a little bit more protection when you're walking across man-made surfaces. But yeah, I would say if you're going to go barefoot, take your shoes off and go run off in somewhere in a field, off-road, in a wood, and just not run, walk for a start. Just get the feel of the ground by walking through. Challenge yourself. For instance, walk through a stinging nettle patch, just to understand what it feels like to have your bottom of your feet stung, because the nerves in your feet are different. It's a very sensitive part of the body. I think it's the second most sensitive part of the body, but it's a different kind of nerve ending, and so it's not like getting stung on the hand or having a thorn in your hand or anything else. I mean, everyone says, oh, what happens if you step on a piece of glass? Well, one thing I would say is don't step on glass. Secondly, I would say I've been going barefoot for, now 30 years, and apart from thorns, I have never actually stuck anything in my foot, like a nail or a piece of glass, but it is a different sensation. I think if you were to have a nail through your foot, it would not be like the same sensation as a nail through your hand. But probably better not to experiment with that. One other aspect I talk about running is the idea that running barefoot teaches you also to start kind of bring the feet and the legs underneath you. You run from underneath your body, not kind of, legs don't kind of shoot out in front and behind. It's very much something being picked up by the ultra running community, who run long distances, and it's about efficiency, about keeping the leg movements down to a very efficient movement, because you've got to run for 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. So they've learnt through their experiences, or through our experiences, since we're ultra runners as well. But also the thing, it brings the legs underneath you, so that is a much more useful, more efficient way of running. And I always say to people, the idea of because a lot has been said about the damaging effects of heel striking. Very much the minimalist shoe movement has come about because of the kind of, it is, there is scientific study, but it's anecdotal, about the amount of injury in runners, chronic injury, particularly with ligament, Achilles tendon injuries, knee injuries. And it has been noticed that the increase in cushioning on running shoes hasn't actually led to any improvement, and perhaps has even has seen a increase. Now, and one of the aspects of that is because of the heel strike. As you can increase the length of your stride, the only way to increase the length of your stride is to land on your heel. That's kind of known. If you look at the runners of the 40s and 50s and earlier, they had very, very short strides because they couldn't land on the heels, but they had to go run faster. And so the only way to run faster is to have a increase your cadence, which is the amount of strides per minute. But with development of running shoes, of course, you could lengthen your stride instead of cadence. But the only way to do that, you couldn't land on your midfoot or forefoot, you had to land on your heel to do that, so which is why the great cushioning of the revolution of cushioned running shoes have developed. Now, landing on your heel is not necessarily a problem. There are lots of good runners who will land on their heel, and lots of bad runners, in terms of their style, who will land midfoot. I think the evidence has shown that it's not the landing on the heel, it's not the initial impact, it's the increase in loading, it's how fast that weight comes on to the foot. So if you're moving at speed, you land on your heel, so the weight transfers onto your midfoot. It's the amount of the shortness of time that loading comes on that seems to do the damage. If you land midfoot, though you don't get, it's less likely that you are able to do that. But it's not a given. There are plenty of people, like I said, who could land midfoot, but actually they're having the same effect on their feet as somebody who lands with very much a heel strike and has the same damaging effect. But anyway, yes, it's going barefoot just teaches you to think about your running a bit more. Just to, it's not just throwing your feet at the ground without any thought to the impact. You are actually making decisions as you run. You have to be aware of what you're running across. You have to be aware that you might land on something and not be able to put your full weight on that foot, so have to move on to the next foot. So it teaches you, I think, to run a bit daintily, I think is the word. And you watch these barefoot runners, and literally they graze over the ground. It's almost as if their feet don't touch the ground, and that's the kind of style you want. Not these heavy, bouncing, loping strides you see of some people. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to fall over now. Just to go to show. There we go. Okay, well, I'll turn you off.